There has been a historical grievance at that place in terms of the electricity bills, because the people feel that uh, they haven't got the good deal in terms of their resources have been used for the generation of electricity, but they have been paying high tariff rates and also not getting uninterrupted supply of power. But that led to a nationwide movement. And interestingly, I think the we have noticed in Pakistan that the state and elites in general are careful in terms of reforms in the realm of socio-cultural changes, right? Especially on the question of religion or culture. But they have been very insensitive or indifferent towards people's economic needs, right? And therefore, in any economy or in any society, you need a minimal stability, right? And that stability is key for enforcing reforms as well. It seems like the government has overplayed, and by government, it seems like all stakeholder, every party included, overplayed their hand and pushed average folks, especially working and middle classes, to a critical threshold. Now they have crossed that threshold, and people are now willing to take risk and go in streets. Um, and
Yeah.
it's also an interesting aspect, because historically we heard folks saying that in Pakistan people don't come around on issues of uh, economic justice, right? But here it's a consumption related issue, right? But people feel some sort of solidarity. Everybody can relate to each other in terms of, well, oh, you got such a high electricity bill and so forth. So it has created a solidarity movement as well, which is again something which was missing for a time.
Yes, Danish, that's a very good argument about around solidarity that you raised. But let me also add something that, Human Rights Watch, for example, yesterday made an extraordinary statement in asking the IMF to help Pakistan uphold right to electricity. So, as you know, Universal Declaration of Human Rights talks about standard of living, and the HRW reiterated in its press release that, right to an adequate standard of living includes everyone's right without discrimination to sufficient, reliable, safe, clean, accessible, and affordable electricity. Now, obviously, and they talked about putting into place a social protection plan universally, especially for the poor. But I mean, IMF argues that Pakistani state subsidizes electricity, and as we know, a good number of line losses occur. That
Mhm.
also, and there's electricity theft. Also, there's power distribution systems are defunct or in certain places dysfunctional. So, in the short term, what can this government do? I mean, can it just turn around and tell IMF we are not going to accept this and we're going to revive the subsidy? They would lose their IMF program.
Yeah, I mean, yes, they're kind of stuck in a rock and a hard place, right? So, and it doesn't seem like the interim government is in any mood of defying IMF, right? So they are more interested in maybe negotiating terms with them. So there's a broader critique on IMF framework and generally the neoliberal framework, where it is all about accounting, right? So economics is reduced to accounting exercise, that you want to just balance sheets and just add there and subtract there, instead of looking economics more as a long-term process, where at times you do have to bear losses, but they lead to long-term gains, right? So in that sense, but it's not on the cards right now for the Pakistani government if they have to stay within the realm of IMF program. Still, they can do some administrative measures. For instance, as you mentioned, ending line losses, which again, there are some more technical line losses, but also due to what they call governance failures in many ways, where the enforcement of uh, whatever, especially in terms of the recovering bills and also some officer cadres, both within civil military bureaucracies, we heard, are not fully paying their bills, right? Or at least getting subsidies. So these, again, these might not be enough to offset that huge tariff, but can help at least the most marginalized segments of the society. So, in other words, have to reallocate some resources and subsidize folks at the bottom, and especially the PSDP as well, the Public Sector Development Program. Maybe some funds can be rechanneled towards helping people in terms of those, especially who are the lower ends of the society.
Right, right. And Danish, this is obviously not unique to Pakistan. We have seen similar protests in Latin America, in Africa, in other parts of Asia. And the IMF seems kind of immune. I mean, after, I teach a class in international development, and one of the weeks we devote to these programs. And the reality is that for 40 years or so, since the 80s, these structural adjustment programs, I mean, what is the problem there? Why can't they just learn from their experiences of handing down these sort of textbookish conditions from the neoliberal framework, of course, not realizing that how complicated these structures are? Because the IMF would never tell the government of Pakistan that, end all elite privileges, all the $17 billion of tax concessions and special rates. When it comes to elites and powerful circles, the IMF is kind of evasive. I mean, it just makes an odd comment or two, and then we pick it up and say, okay, IMF has also said that. But where do you think is the problem? I mean, we know the problem with Pakistan's governance, as you said, and
Mhm.
Pakistan's, the state capture by the elites. But the IMF also needs to introspect on that front. What do you say?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you made a good point, and then IMF gets a lot of heat. But in the case of Pakistan, I mean, it's a unique case in a way that governments do sign deals and then backtrack, right? And on a very short time horizon, which also complicates things. But as I said earlier, the overall framework is accounting framework for IMF, where they're interested in making sure that Pakistan does not default on its foreign liabilities, right? So if that's the sole goal, IMF is doing good policy recommendations because they want to make sure that the creditors, they do end up getting their money, right? So in that way, it's fine. But from the domestic political economy lens, it's the domestic policymakers who need to think beyond IMF and see reform in a more structural way. And by structure, I mean moving economy from low productivity to high productive sectors of the economy, and that require creating some new winners and some many big losers. And for instance, we need to move away from the real estate-led accumulation towards more sustainable development centered on maybe the industry, manufacturing, or services sector. So, and in that process, as you mentioned, the existing elites who are getting cheap rents, they will be heard, right? Therefore, it's a coordination failure at a broader scale. So, if you are an elected politician, you have a short policy horizon, right? You have short time horizon in the parliament or in the executive, and these reforms require massive support from the masses as well as from the other stakeholders, and which Pakistan has, and I think many governments have been lacking. And that's why that it creates more like a coordination failure. So in some ways, they're all can be blamed, and in other ways, none of them can be blamed because it's a structural issue. That's why we call it structural, because it's beyond one or two individuals' ability to manage this.